Okay, I'm on stream starting, just doing some final checks.
Fine. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's get started. Hey everyone, how's everyone doing tonight? Welcome to our DM inspiration stream again. Here it's Monday, and well, welcome back. It's been a while since we last chatted about DM content here on Neo Tokyo Project, and that's because we have been really busy over the past couple of weeks. In fact, we've been running so many games, so many introductory adventures. Wow, we've been so overwhelmed over the weekend, but it's great because we saw so many new people interested in Dungeons and Dragons coming to the studio to join us, and we were really glad to see that. They went away all smiling, happy faces, and we're raring to play more. So that's one of the most exciting things for us as game masters. We really love the idea of introducing the game to new players and getting them on board. And today's stream is going to be a little bit about that as well. We're going to be talking about some of the crystallization of our experiences running games for new players, some of the tips and tricks that we can share, especially since we have been talking about starting up a new series of talks and just some DM inspiration tips for everyone who might be keen to get more involved as a DM, especially for those of you who might be running games for your communities, whether you're running for Adventures League or for your local library group, or whether you're doing it in school or whatever, right? And this series of talks is going to be titled DM 101, and it's going to be done a little informally. It's not going to be too serious, and we're just going to be chatting all about the things that we do here at Neo Tokyo Project and when we run games for Adventures League Singapore here. And hopefully these experiences that we share will come in handy to help everyone become better DMs. Yeah, so first things first, today we are, like I said, going to be talking about running games for brand new players and how, well, some of the things I do, as well as some of the things that we have observed that are really helpful for getting new players on board and getting them comfortable with the game. That is really helpful, especially since many new players have completely no idea what D&D is all about. And our job as DMs, as game masters, is to evangelize and to, get them hooked to the game, right? So here we go. So first things first, and I think this is really crucial. A lot of DMs I've discovered might want to do this a little bit more when they're playing D&D, when they're at the table, and that is to get to know the players. I think this is the first major step when you're introducing new players to the game. It's so crucial. And this is something that people kind of take for granted. They don't realize that this is something that they should be doing. And I've seen this happen quite a bit. Hey there! How's things going, Eladriel? What's up? So today we are talking about some tips on getting new players on board, and you'll see this in action if you ever come join us for one of our D&D game sessions here in the studio where we're introducing new players to the game. Yeah, and after we take care of this, we're also going to talk about how DMs can help new players build characters, especially for Adventures League. So that's on the agenda later as well. And with this tip number one, getting to know the players, this is really essential. And I think that this is something that most people need to know. Yeah, I know he was here. He was here on Saturday, so hopefully this is something that he's already been very familiar with, and hopefully more of our friends who are, just jumping on just to check out the stream, you can kind of get familiar with what we're talking about as well as we go through these tips. Yeah, so first things first, I think it's really essential for DMs, especially if they're sitting down with a group of new players, to introduce themselves. Keep it brief, don't overly complicate things, but I think it's really good to know that get to know everyone on a name basis. Find out what kind of pronouns they prefer. Sometimes you may want to write that down as well if you're a DM, and that's really crucial. If you can't remember, personally, we have several ways to get players to introduce themselves here in the studio. We also have table tents for them that we use during our games, so they can write down their names and their pronouns and stuff like that. But the most important thing about it, the most crucial thing, is to make everyone comfortable, right? So introduce yourself, be a good host. Tell people who have come to your table, your name, greet them with a smile, get everyone comfortable at the table, get them talking. Ask them how their day was. Ask them what their interests are. Find some common ground. Talk a little bit with every player to understand their level of experience, their level of understanding of the fantasy genre, because you're playing D&D. Find out what they do in their free time as a hobby, whether they play video games, whether they watch movies, whether they love TV series, build rapport that way. I think this is so important because once the players get a little bit more comfortable with you and you're the DM, everything just kind of falls into place. And at the same time, understanding what they like, what is interesting to them, and finding that common ground gives you the opportunity to use that as a common language to bridge some of the things that you might be talking about at the table and to make relevant examples to illustrate the point to your players. So like over the weekend, we had a group of players who were a bunch of friends and they all had a common interest in Dota 2. So that was really helpful because I used to play Dota as well, and we could talk all about the rules, all about the things that were relevant at the table, and we could make examples and link them all back to Dota 2, which is something they're all somewhat familiar with. So it helps that they all play the same game, and for myself, I had the same degree of knowledge about the game as well, and that was handy, and that made explaining things a little easier. The same with friends or, with people who come to your table who might have watched a movie that you're also kind of familiar with. Maybe they love the Marvel cinematic universe, and you're kind of familiar with the cinematic universe as well. You could make relevant examples with that. You could describe spellcasting the same way that Doctor Strange does it. Or you could talk about how someone might be making a dexterity check or making an acrobatics check, and you could use Spider-Man as an example. And that could kind of work. So think a little bit about these things that take place outside the table, common interests, common ground. This is really crucial. And for a lot of the players that have played with me before at my tables, they'll know that I'm a very big fan of anime and video games, right? And sometimes if they're also familiar with video games and anime, you could just draw parallels to those things and the happenings at the table for D&D, and that is so useful. It gets everyone kind of on the same page really quickly because they can make the necessary inferences and they can draw reference from what they already know. So that's good to have as well. So definitely introduce yourself, make everyone comfortable. I cannot stress this enough. Get everyone talking at the table before we start. And having everyone at the table be active and participatory is so essential to having a good session, especially for new players, because they don't know what D&D is about. This is their first time, but they may know so many other things all around them. because they have their own life experiences as well. And if you can relate that, that's going to be so useful. So that's tip number one, and I think one of the more essential tips that you will need to keep in mind as a DM. And let's go to tip number two. Tip number two, this is where we start thinking about how to introduce the game to the players. So first things first, introduce yourself, get everyone comfortable, and then you start talking a little bit about the game. The first thing I like to tell people when they sit down to a game of Dungeons and Dragons is I like to preface it by explaining just a little bit, a line or two, about the whole concept of D&D. I'm not going to go into a big, long history recap. That's not necessary, right? I'm not going to give them a history lesson because they don't need to know about how the game was created originally. They don't need to know how many editions there are. They're here to sit down to a game of 5th edition. You don't even need to tell them much more than the fact that, hey, we're here to play Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game. It's from the fantasy genre. It's a collaborative storytelling experience. And introduce the 20-sided die. Explain the value of the 20-sided die. What does it do in the game? So these are just simple things that you can do. You don't have to be very in-depth about it. So don't overwhelm them, like I said. And as far as possible, because these players are new to the game, they have a blank slate. They have just come here, they're curious, they're just going to sit down, they want to find out more about D&D. Maybe they heard about it because they watched Stranger Things, maybe they followed some celebrities who play D&D, maybe they heard about, I don't know, Critical Role, perhaps, and they put it on in the background like a podcast, and that's perfectly okay. So they might have had a little bit of exposure to the game, but they haven't actually sat down to read the rule book. They haven't sat down to read the player's handbook in detail. They're not familiar with role-playing games at the table, or tabletop games as a whole, and that's perfectly okay. All you need to do is to bring them to the table, sit them down, tell them, hey, we're going to sit down and we're going to play some D&D. This is a tabletop role-playing game. It's fantasy genre, like I said before, fantasy genre, and tell them a little bit about how the D20 works, right? All your success and failure during the game is determined by the 20-sided die roll. The higher the roll, obviously, it's the better. If it's the lower the roll, it's not so good, right? Avoid complicated terms. Don't use unnecessary mechanical language. You don't want to overwhelm your players. And if you need to, you can use real-world examples or use examples related to their hobbies or interests, like I said. Like if you want to describe how someone might make an athletics check, maybe they're incredibly strong. You're going to tell them, what's the value of the strength score? What does the strength score on your character sheet represent? It's how much you can push and lift, right? Or how many bench presses you can do. If your players are gym rats, they'll know. Or if you want to talk about how dexterous someone is, what's the dexterity score for? You can use some examples that might be relevant to them. Like perhaps you can, if you know that one of them loves to do maybe skateboarding or gymnastics, you can talk about how you can relate the dexterity score to that. And you can mention the acrobatic skill as part of that. So you can use real-world examples. And that would be handy as well for the players because you're aligning all these things with things and paradigms they already know. And that would make it so much easier for them to pick up the game. What else do we normally do here when we talk a little bit about introducing the game to them? You'll probably want to talk to them about the different types of dice as well. You may show them, hey, this is a set of polyhedral dice. We're going to be using polyhedral dice during the course of the adventure. The most important dice is obviously the 20-sided die. You're going to be using this the most often. And then you might also want to preface it by saying, hey, you don't have to worry about what to roll. I am the DM, I'm the game master. I'm here to help tell your story and make you the stars of the show. You're going to be the heroes. And when a situation calls for it, I, the DM, will prompt you and tell you to roll the dice. So all you need to do is sit back, relax, enjoy the experience, and then we can all have a great game together. So that's something to think about. One other thing that I think is really important, and a lot of DMs I've seen who run intro games, they don't kind of put enough stock in this, I think, and that is to use pre-generated characters. I cannot stress this enough. Why did I say use pre-generated characters instead of encouraging the players to come with a character design of their own? Because first things first, many of these players are absolutely new to the game. They wouldn't know where to start if they wanted to build a character of their own. And that is one of the things that's going to be challenging for them to do. You don't expect someone who has never played the game before to read up and do their own research and come to the table with a character that's already been pre-created on their end. You don't expect them to come down to the table with the kind of experience or the knowledge, and getting them a pre-generated character, just makes things so much easier. And on top of that, what's easier for you as well? What's easier for you as well if you're using a pre-generated character is that you can very, very easily remember the details that are on the character sheets of pre-generated characters, right? So because you are already familiar with the pre-generated characters, they're the ones that you've made just for the session. You'll be more intimately familiar with them, and that means when you are speaking to the players who have picked up that particular character, you will kind of know what the character can do. You'll kind of be aware of the skills of the character, the kind of abilities that they have, the kind of class features they have. And that way you can easily explain to the players if you need to. You don't have to be scrambling for your books. You don't have to be scrambling for any references because you made those characters yourselves. You made the pre-generated characters. And at this point, when we're using pre-gens, this is also the part of the game where you start to encourage the players to take a look at their character sheets. This is also where you can run through the character sheets with the players. I've discovered that for many players, they tend to get overwhelmed when you just put a big character sheet with many fields and many numbers on the table in front of them. So we have been working on revamping the designs of the character sheets to make it easier for the players. And while we're still in the process of doing that for our adventurously pre-generated characters that we usually use when we're doing new games or intro games or onboarding, there are some great ones available for you to download that came with the Dragon of Icefire Peak. And that was the Essentials kit. They made a new set of pre-gens that you can use, and it's really, really cool. So you can take some of those as well. You might have a few limited options, but limiting options is not necessarily a bad thing. Keep things simple for your players since they're new to the game. And what you want to do with the character sheets is to teach them what the numbers mean. Draw attention to the things that matter. Talk a little bit about ability scores. Talk about the modifiers. What do the modifiers do? When you roll a 20-sided die, you add the modifier to the result of the die roll, or you subtract the modifier if it's negative from the die roll. You can share at this point in time a little bit about skills. Talk to them about why characters have certain skills. These skills reflect the training and expertise and experience of characters based on their backgrounds, based on the class that they have, and based on any other things that might be relevant and pertinent to the character. And then you could maybe highlight a little bit that, hey, these characters have certain attacks and abilities. They have attacks using weapons, they may have spell attacks if they're spellcasters. Draw attention to those parts, but you don't really need to go in-depth into that because you want to teach them while they're playing the game. You want to keep things moving and get them interested in that and learning while they're experiencing it firsthand. Yeah, but the most important part of the character sheet at the start of the game, and this is something that I've discovered is really handy for players, is the background, the bonds, the flaws, any RP notes that might be there on the character sheet. Maybe the character has a backstory included. And you as a DM, you probably want to draw attention for the players to those parts of the character sheet because the characters are going to be portrayed by the players on top of everything else. And you want to give the players some time to look at the details, look at the bonds, the flaws, the background, their ideals, what do the characters do in their backstory, and let the players internalize them. Give the players a bit of time. I've discovered that this is the best time to let the players take a good look at the story. Give them maybe 5 minutes or so and say, hey, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to take a look at that and imagine how you would portray this character. If you were an actor and you were going to step into the shoes of the character and you were going to speak like the character and think like the character, how are you going to do this? And give them a bit of time to look into that. And that's going to be so helpful because when the characters are going to be played at the table, this is an opportunity for you to remember what are the players doing, what are the characters doing, is it aligned? And then use this opportunity to give them inspiration. You can also take this opportunity to encourage the players to introduce themselves in character when they first start the adventure. So are they playing the hulking, quiet barbarian who's maybe a dragonborn and has been outcast from their tribe because they cannot breathe fire? That's an interesting story. Maybe they're gonna describe themselves in a certain way. Maybe they're gonna talk about how they enter the scene, clanking in their plate armor or something, and use this opportunity to gauge how good they are at portraying their characters and reward them with inspiration. And then explain what inspiration means. Because that is also a mechanic that you want to use in the game and you want to give inspiration liberally. So talk about it. So next on our list of tips, I think that this is also something that can be pretty handy for DMs to remember. And that's one of the more important things here. It's to show. Don't tell. It's not enough to tell people who are playing the game about the rules. You want to show them how the rules work in the game itself. You want to give them first-hand experience. So ease the players into understanding what the roles mean and why do they matter. And if they are new, especially, because this is the first time they're playing the game, you want to get them involved, actively making those roles so that they can experience it firsthand and they can internalize it. So tell them a little bit about why they need to make a strength check when they're trying to climb up a low wall, perhaps, or why they need to make a dexterity check when they're trying to walk across a tightrope or a slippery surface without falling down. Maybe they need to make an intelligence check because the character is trying to recall an important bit of information they read in a book somewhere when they were studying. And this might be relevant to the situation that they find themselves in. Or maybe they need to make a wisdom check to determine if someone is trying to pull a fast one at them. Right? And these can tie into their skills as well. Skills like insight, skills like arcana, skills like acrobatics, athletics, whatever. Let the players experience those firsthand. And I would say prompt the players, if you need to, when they are making their roles. Guide them along, because players who are new will have maybe not such a great grasp of the mechanics. Or they may take things in a little bit more... they may actually take to the game a lot more naturally than you think. And I've actually seen that a lot. A lot of new players are super creative, and they tend to apply their understanding of things that happen in the real world. They tend to apply their common sense to the game, and that's great. And a lot of them may want to experience the fantasy world and apply that kind of knowledge, and that's perfectly okay. So, and that is where you ask them for skill checks, you want to ask them for ability checks, and you want to reward them for thinking that particular way. And use these opportunities to guide them and remind them of the rules and encourage them to understand and memorize those rules as they're playing. Because the more you do it, the more practiced you are, the more naturally it becomes. And of course, tip number 5, and this is something that I also think is really crucial when you're teaching new players, is to keep things engaging. Hey Rizal, good to have you with us. Thanks for dropping by. Just doing some DM tips today for how to run games with new players, especially since we did quite a few intro games over the weekend. And we have been running so many intro games ever since our studio became, super active for D&D. Yeah, and a lot of people have come here and they've played in all our intro sessions, and I think these are some good points to share if anyone's interested in DMing for a new, fresh play group. So one of the things that you want to do as a DM is you want to be engaging. And how can you be engaging in the table? You're a storyteller, first and foremost. So think about how you can paint a picture of the scene, how you can make it more interesting for the players, how you can hook them in and tease their imagination. So you want to paint a vivid picture of them, right? So you want to use words to describe what's happening around them, what they see, what they feel, what they hear. Get them into the mood of imagining that they are in the shoes of their characters and that they are the ones walking through that fantasy world, rather than the character who might be a miniature on the tabletop. Of course, it really helps if you are able to work with terrain and miniatures like we do in the studio, because those add an extra dimension to your storytelling, to the experience as a whole. And if you do not have access to all the terrain, all the miniatures, you're going to be relying on your words, on how descriptive you can be, and what kind of pictures you can paint in the minds of your players. You're going to be using those words to transform that eraser on the table or that shiny marble on the table into a goblin or into a big rock or into a prop that you might be using to highlight your story. So you want to learn how to be as descriptive as you can as a DM. And this is something that you'll pick up as you go along, as you enhance your vocabulary, as you discover new ways to tell the story. But what you want to do is you want to talk about the scene. You want to talk about what's happening around the characters. They are the stars of the show, and you are kind of like the director, or maybe you're like the writer, and you're trying to describe what's happening. You want to talk about their actions, how a character swings their sword, how the sword narrowly misses, how it bites into the ground and throws up a clod of dirt, how it leaves a furrow in the ground as the enemy drags the blade along and tries to swing the second time, spinning an arc on their heel as they do so. Talk about the consequences of actions. What happens when a character kicks someone off the rooftop of a building? What happens when someone casts a spell? What happens when a lightning bolt strikes the top of a tower? Describe all these things. And this is one of the ways they can do that you can use to make the adventure more engaging, more interesting for your players. And you will discover more often than not that when the characters are doing cool things at the table and you're describing the cool things, the players are going to get excited. They're going to play along. And that's what you want to do, right? You're an entertainer as well. You're not just here to facilitate the game. You're here to also entertain and engage as a game master. So you're going to be helping the players to feel like they're living in the fantasy world, like they're part of the scene, part of the story, and they're doing heroic things. And that is pretty awesome, all things considered. One other thing to think about is keep the story moving. And when I say keep the story moving, I think this is something that every DM is going to have to slowly learn and practice and experience. You're going to want to learn how to read your players. Whether a player is getting bored at the table, whether they're fidgeting, whether you're looking at their facial expressions, what's the kind of feedback that you're getting for your story? And is the story slowing down? Are you getting too engrossed in talking about the mechanics when the players are all here to play and have fun and they're not so keen to learn the rules of the game, but they're more here for a good time with the rest of their friends? So you want to maybe use your insight checks in real life. Or if you are, not proficient in insight checks, you might want to just keep things moving anyway, rely on your charisma, things like that. And you absolutely don't want to get bogged down by rules. And one of the biggest challenges when you're running a game for new players and getting bogged down is definitely combat. Some people you'll discover really love combat, and you can kind of tell when you're chatting with the players. Or you can kind of tell when you see how their faces light up when you say, hey, we're going to roll some initiative, we're getting into combat. But there are also some players who get kind of bored because combat takes place in turns, and it takes a while for you to go around the table and get back to someone. And when we're talking about getting around the table and doing things in turns, this is where you as a DM, you want to maybe share a little bit about how everyone in a cooperative storytelling game like Dungeons & Dragons is here to be a star in their own right, and everyone's here to share the spotlight. And one of the ways you can keep people engaged is not just by rolling initiatives, getting people, jumping into the thick of things, into the action, but by picking out characters that are at the table. And this comes back to you understanding the character sheets and using pregens and focusing on specific characters and say, hey, your character is a wizard. You are proficient in the use of magical arts, and you have studied many great spells in the past. Some of them you have mastered, some of them you are still in the process of mastering, but because of your knowledge, you are aware that something unusual is happening in this part of the story. Maybe you can roll for me an Arcana check. So identify players at the table, and you as the DM, you should be shining the spotlight on the players when you think it's relevant and appropriate. So this is where you can keep the story going and keep things engaging as well. Identify the strengths of each character, identify the strengths of each player. Do some of them take to role-playing a lot easier? Do some of them take to understanding mechanics a lot better? Identify those things and tap on that and use that to help you tell a better story. And of course, because this is actually a pretty short kind of discussion, we're almost to the end of the first part of our discussion here, and that is tip number 6, to be flexible. And this is something that you'll find is a lot more relevant than not when it comes to teaching new players how to play the game and when you're running the game for new players. Because a lot of new players tend to come to the game without expectations. Some of them may not be genre savvy, they may not be familiar with the fantasy genre, but they may have watched movies or TV shows, or they may have watched anime series, or they have played video games before, and they can apply some degree of that knowledge to the situation. And sometimes that means that you as the DM, you might be thrown a curveball here. You might discover that some of the players have some things that they want to do that might be a little bit off your expectations. It might not be something that's in the script. And this is where I constantly tell DMs, even if you're running for fresh players, and in fact, it's great to run for fresh players because a lot of them come to the table with fresh perspectives. So don't be afraid to go off the script. Don't be afraid to tell them, hey, this is something that is really innovative. This is something really cool, really creative. I'll allow it. And This is something that you as the DM should absolutely do because you want the players to be there being willing to do stuff. You want the players to engage with the world, to experience the world as it is, and to interact with the world, with the NPCs, with everything that's around them. And this is great for you as the DM as well, because this is a great opportunity for you to practice your improvising skills, right? So this allows you to practice your improvisation, allows you to think about how an NPC would react in the spur of the moment, how the world would interact with the characters at that particular point in time. And perhaps the most important thing of all when it comes to this, even for Adventurers League. And why do I emphasize Adventurers League is because a lot of the intro games that we run here in the studio are Adventurers League games. And typically in Adventurers League, we talk about how the game must be run as close to the text as possible. It must be run as close to the module that's published as possible. But that's absolutely not true, because you as a DM are also empowered. And if the characters do something that's different, that's off the beaten path, they go somewhere else instead of where you were expecting them to go, and they do something that's completely going to throw you a curve, that's perfectly okay. Don't obsess over it. Don't worry too much about the rules in an intro game, because chances are your players don't know the rules enough, and you as the DM can improvise. Improvised skill checks are a thing. They exist, and you can make rules calls as and when, as needed as a DM, and that's perfectly okay. The most important thing about it is that you want to make a great first time experience for your players, because new players are the future of D&D. They're going to be the ones who will be picking up the game, and they will join the pool of players that you'll be playing with when they join your community. And you definitely want them to have a great experience. And if this means that you have to maybe be a little creative in how you handle the character decisions, that's perfectly fine. Go for it. Most importantly, of course, is remember, they are the stars of the show. You want to let them win. I've seen tables, intro games, where everyone at the table gets wiped. All the characters are killed off, despite all their best efforts, because the DM just wants to roll the dice and they roll in the open. Or perhaps the DM is a little bit bloodthirsty, and that doesn't make for a great experience, I would say. And what you want to do is you want the players to succeed. You want to tell a great story. They are heroes. They can struggle a little bit, but don't be afraid to fudge the dice. Don't be afraid to do things in such a way where the characters get a hard-won victory. Because ultimately, if they have a good experience, they're going to be coming back. They're going to be playing a lot more D&D in the future, and you'll have plenty of chances to take the kid gloves off when they get more experienced. So don't worry too much about that. And that is tip number 6. So before we talk about the next portion, this is a quick DM's checklist. I found this generally useful when I'm teaching new players about the game, when I'm sitting down to an adventure for new players. What you want to do is you probably want to cover gameplay basics. So some degree of knowledge about the game is good to have for the players. Even if they're completely new, you probably want to talk a little bit about that. Talk about the D20, like I said before. Teach them what the D20 does. Teach them about the values of each die. Identify which dice are what type of die so that they can remember. Yeah, and you may want to talk a little bit about things like ability checks, skill checks. Just get them kind of aware of these things. You don't have to go super in-depth because you want to teach them as you are running the adventure, as you're telling the story. Maybe they come across an area where they have to make an athletics check or an acrobatics check to jump over a large ditch. This is where you can use that is an example to teach the players about making ability checks. So get the gameplay basics down as part of your first session, as when you're guiding them along, when you're running games with new players, give them opportunities to practice. We also want to talk maybe a little bit about how to roleplay. I think that this is something that's a bit critical as well, because you are, after all, playing a tabletop role-playing game. And D&D is about, being a character in this fantasy world, living in this fantasy world, and doing all sorts of cool things in character in this fantasy world. So if you're able to help guide them along, play those NPCs, ham it up, interact with the characters, make sure that the characters get the opportunity to get into the zone, right? To make sure the players have the chance to roleplay with your NPCs. Give them as many opportunities to do so as possible. Highlight to them what's in their backgrounds, what's in their bonds, their flaws, their ideals, and any parts of the story that might be relevant, and help them to create this image of their characters in their heads, and get them practicing their role-playing as well. And finally, this is the third thing on my checklist that I usually want players to get a bit of a takeaway when they leave the table, and that is they should kind of understand a little bit about how combat in D&D works. So this is where you explain things like, what's your armor class? What does initiative do? How many squares can you move in D&D based on your speed? Perhaps you may want to ask a little bit about how familiar they are with war games. If some of them are familiar with war games, this might come a little easier to them. But for those who are not, or those who have maybe got some experience playing strategy games on the PC or on Switch or whatever, they might also have some inkling of how combat in D&D works. Because you move a number of squares, you get some actions that you can use, and this is where you as a DM probably want to go a little bit in depth about your movement, your action, your bonus action, how these things interact and how they are differentiated. But you don't want to overwhelm them. So give them ample chances to take their attacks, to make their moves, to cast their spells. So this is going to be a good way to ease them into understanding combat, just for a little bit. So this is helpful for that. Ultimately, the takeaway you want from a new player's game, a new player's session, right? Where you're just introducing new players to the idea of getting their feet wet with D&D and giving them a bit of a teaser. You probably want to tell a good story, and in that story you want to be able to share with them some of the gameplay basics. You want to make sure that they get ample opportunities to roleplay. You want to give them maybe one scenario or two, where they get to fight someone or fight a monster or overcome a challenge. And they can go away, feeling like they've had a great time. They've had a good 2 to 3 hours. They've experienced what it's like to live as a character in a fantasy world, and what it means to be a hero in the story. That's ultimately what you want, because you want them to have a good experience. You want to get them coming back. And that's pretty much why I have these things on my checklist. And I think that these are great things that you can have on your checklist as well if you are running games with new players, wherever you are. And I hope that this has been useful for you. So we have more or less covered the first portion of what we're talking about tonight. And you'll discover that, in the coming weeks, I'm going to make these DM inspiration sessions a little shorter, a little bit more targeted, a little bit more focused, rather than me rambling on and on about writing tips or whatever. I want to just keep them more on point, because quite a few of our viewers and quite a few of our fans have told us about how they want something that's kind of self-contained, like an episode of its own. So more 45 minutes to 1 hour sections like this. So the next thing that we're going to be talking a little bit about is actually how to build a character for Adventurous League play. And Adventurous League, of course, is the organized play portion of D&D officially endorsed by Wizards of the Coast. This is their program. So Wizards of the Coast runs Adventurous League. And Adventurous League simply means that you're creating a character in this persistent campaign. And you can bring your character to any other Adventurous League game around the world. It doesn't have to be just here in Singapore. It doesn't have to be a particular store. You can bring it to a store in London that runs Adventurous League if you wish, a store in Japan, a store in the US, wherever. And you can play that character because your progress is kind of saved as if it were like, in a video game, right? It's kind of saved because you have your log sheets. So a character in Adventurous League is a portable character. And where Adventurous League games are run, anyone who wishes to sit at the table to just play the game, you can just jump in as long as the DM says okay, and you're able to conduct yourself well, and you don't violate any code of conduct that is at the store that you're playing at, or at the venue that you're playing at, or at the event that you're playing at. And that's the benefit of it all. Adventurous League is great for portability. It gets you to the opportunity to play in games where with complete strangers sometimes, to make new friends. And that's one of the greatest benefits of it. You don't have to have your own play group. You don't have to have your own DM and a group of friends to play with. If you don't want to, you can just jump into an Adventurous League game somewhere that's being offered by a store or by a venue or by an event. And you're perfectly fine. You're all set. Assuming, of course, that you follow the rules and guidelines of Adventurous League. And there are some rules and guidelines. Because this is an organized play campaign, everyone builds their characters according to a specific subset of rules. And you are limited in the number of books that you can use, number of resources that you can use to build your character, because you want to get everyone on the relatively same power level. You don't want people using things that are published by random fans on the internet, on D&D Wiki or something, which is not necessarily the most balanced and the most appropriate for play. So Adventurous League does have some set of rules and guidelines, and you can definitely check those out if you go to the official Wizards of the Coast website for Adventurous League. So the basics for character creation, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this, and this can be a bit challenging if you are completely new to D&D. But if you are a DM and you are running D&D games for beginners, at the end of your intro game, after they have played the pre-generated character, you may want to sit down with the players and say, hey, why don't I walk you through how to create a character? And if you are running Adventurous League, chances are you'll be using the basic steps here that I've listed. These are the character creation rules for Adventurous League as well. So if you are the DM, definitely help your players out. This is a great opportunity for you to do so. Sit down with them. Give them a step-by-step, a blow-by-blow if you want. Yeah, so you talk about standard array or 27-point buys. You need to kind of explain to them, what's a standard array? What's this set of numbers? How do you use them for ability scores? What is 27-point buy? How much points does it take for you to buy to get your ability score up to 15 in a specific ability score, for example? And of course, because this is for Adventurous League, you are limited in the number of source books that you can use. Official sources only, of course. These have to be books that are published by Wizards of the Coast. You can use the Player's Handbook, which is a default book for most people. The Player's Handbook or the core rules or the basic rules are your teaser to some of the content, some of the features, some of the options available to you as a player. And as a DM, if you are running for new players, you're helping them character creation, you want to show them that. You got to tell them, hey, most of the class information, some of your options that you have are in the player's handbook. But if you're playing Adventures League and you have purchased all these other books, or you have joined a campaign where the game master has decided that there are specific books that they want to use for, and they are willing to share those details in those books with you, you can use those options. In Adventures League, this typically means Player's Handbook, the Xanathar's Guide, Tasha's Cauldron, Fizban's Treasury, Monsters of the Multiverse, which is a new one with the revamped Monstrous Races. So that's one of the new books. If not, you have things like Volo's Guide. You have the other Modern Kindness source book. So quite a few options in Adventures League. And if you are a player and you want to build a new character for Adventures League and you're not sure what books are available, consult the Adventures League Player's Guide, which is downloadable from the Adventures League website on the Wizards website. Or consult your Adventures League DM, or ask some of your friends who play Adventures League and they'll help you out. So for Adventures League as well, there are several options for the levels that your characters start at. You can pick a character that starts at level 1, and this will be your experience of going through, early game adventures. You're going to be challenging the world as a fresh-faced adventurer, level 1, and you'll be progressing from level 1 onwards. Or you could start at level 5. You'll be a bit more seasoned. You'll be a little bit more powerful, a little less squishy, I suppose, and you'll be progressing from level 5 onwards. The only caveat is that in Adventures League, all characters must start either at level 1 or level 5 right now, and you only gain a level whenever you complete an adventure. And in the case of Adventures League, adventures are designed for each tier of play, which means that there is a level limit for the adventure that you can participate in. So if you're from level 1 to 4, you can play in a tier 1 adventure. If you're from level 5 to 10, you can play in a tier 2 adventure, and so on and so forth. So there is a level banding for that. And you have to be aware as well that there are certain rules governing advancement in Adventures League as well. But we're not going to talk about that because we're talking about character creation. Other options that are available to you. You can basically pick most races and classes and class options available in the Adventures League allowed legal sourcebooks. And of course, you can also use custom lineage, which allows you to modify a little bit of your character's race options and custom backgrounds. So you can come up with your own mix and matched number of skills, tool, and language proficiencies using the custom backgrounds feature. So this gives you some options to customize your character a little bit more and to fit that into your story. And ultimately, while you are building a character for Adventures League, you do not roll for gold. You do not roll the dice to determine how much money you start with. Instead, you start with the basic equipment package for your class, plus any money that comes from your background. So maybe if you're a noble background, you'll have a bit more money. If you were a not so noble background, you will probably have much less money. But whatever the case is, in Adventures League, you will always have a basic starter kit of equipment on your character that's determined by your class. So you're kind of safe for that. So you don't have to worry about, appearing in the world of D&D, in the fantasy world, completely butt naked. You're not the wretch in Elden Ring. So that's one of the good things. So this is a quick checklist that we kind of prepared that's probably going to be a little helpful for anyone who might be planning to build an Adventures League character. We normally encourage players to start thinking of a concept first. So you start with maybe a short paragraph that you want to pen down perhaps, or you start with a vision of the character that you want to create in mind. So rather than thinking about your race and your class and all the mechanics, because for a lot of new players, I think that mechanics can be quite daunting as well. And we don't want that. So we tell the players who have just come to play and they want to sit down and make their own character now, hey, what do you think of a concept first? What kind of character do you want to build? Maybe you want to build a forest-loving ranger. You think you want to build someone who's very at home in the forest, takes care of the animals in the forest. Maybe it's a lady who loves to live in the forest and play with the animals, and has developed some ability to converse with those animals. That will give you some ideas. You might want to start with making a druid, perhaps, or if you want to make a very skilled and very competent swordsman who is a master of all sorts of weapons. Or yeah, if you want to build a cat lady, a person, and you could determine perhaps this person is actually a lady who's a cat, or maybe a person who really loves cats, and you could determine how that kind of works. To start with a good concept first, and then after that, you start picking out your race options and your class options. So those are the easiest parts that you... Oh, what the hell? What the hell? Okay, so there was a sneak attack with a 20-sided die, and I got hit by that, and it bumped into the keyboard as well. But yeah, so in any case, like I was saying, start with a concept. And after you get your concept, start picking your race, picking your class, and start working with that. Build a vision of what you see for the character. Do you think the character is incredibly strong? If the character is really strong, maybe they're an outdoor person, they do a lot of manual labor, they chop down trees, they hew the logs with an axe and stack up the firewood. Maybe they do a lot of chores around the farm. Then maybe you want them to be a little stronger. You put a higher score in strength. Because they're so tough, they're so durable, you want to give them a higher score in constitution. Or maybe you think they're just this really lean, wiry kind of guy. Kind of smart, rather charming, not the wisest. Then you may want to put your ability scores into dexterity, into charisma, and maybe not so much into your wisdom, perhaps, because they're often prone to be impulsive and make mistakes because they tend to let their to run their mouth instead of thinking of something more, maybe a more diplomatic idea, right? If you want a character to open a pie shop, maybe you could look into that as part of your background. Maybe your character was learning to be a baker, and they were learning how to make pies, and they were perhaps working in a pie shop in town, and that could be a good start. For all you know, the character could come from any walks of life, right? Because this is D&D, this is a fantasy world. All sorts of nasty things that could happen because there's magic, there's monsters. And that could be the catalyst, that could be the driving force for your character to leave their relatively safe life back in town to venture into the wilderness, to become an adventurer, to do things that are scary and dangerous for the common folk. Most any peasant probably wouldn't want to go adventuring. It's not safe. Why do that when you can be just at home tilling the farm, having your 3 meals a day, right? But you're an adventurer. You're doing something very much off the beaten path for most people. It's rather different. Maybe you're out for golden glory. Whatever the case is, this is where you fill in the blanks. This is where point number 3 on this checklist comes from. You talk about your backstory. You write about the factors that determine why your character has left a comfortable life behind, or a safe life behind, or perhaps they were forced to leave and go on an adventure because bad stuff happened at home. That's entirely possible. This is where you fill in the blanks. You talk about what their backstories are, what drives them, what helps them keep themselves grounded. So you if you are a DM and you are running this character creation session for the new players, whether it's before the game or after the game, these are some things you want to think about on that checklist. And it's the same for an Adventures League character or for a character in a homebrew game, because more or less these steps are a requirement to fleshing out your character and making it something more robust, and hopefully something that that the players are going to have fun portraying at the table. So, like I said, concept first, come up with a concept, use the concept to help you shape where you want the mechanics to go. And if you are the DM, obviously you want to work with the players, have a chat with them, guide them along. If you know the game better than them, this is your chance to help them out. Get them, give them more knowledge. If you're running Adventures League in Forgotten Realms, you may want to help them to determine where their starting town is. Maybe they came from Lascaux, the pirate capital. Maybe they came from Waterdeep, the city of splendors. Or maybe they were from Maelmaster and they were a refugee because Maelmaster was blown up during the attack by the elemental cults and later subjugated by the Red Wizards. So this is an interesting element of the story that you can add only because you're the DM and because you know the world better than the players. So be sure to help them out. Make helpful suggestions. And if you think that a player is kind of lost, if you think that they're not quite sure where to go with their idea, guide them along, prompt them, make suggestions based on their concept. Tell them, hey, maybe you want to be you want to be an engineer. And you live in a fantasy world. Do you want to be a mundane engineer or do you want to be an arcane engineer? Do you want to be an artificer using some magic to help, enhance your creations? And that gives you some spells. Or do you want... So it's kind of like a magical scientist. You can explain that to them in words they understand. Or do you want to be a tinkerer? Do you want to just build little things on the side? Do you want to do some crafting on the side? Maybe you can use that to give them proficiency in tinker's tools. Perhaps they're actually a rogue, and because they're so good at mechanisms, they've developed a sense of the ability to tear down traps, to pick locks and stuff like that, just because they're really good with their hands, really dexterous, and they have some experience messing around with mechanisms and little gears and other such creations and contraptions. It's entirely possible. So work with the players, and that's really what it means when you're helping them out with guided character creation, when you're helping them along to bring their concept to life. And there you have it. There you have it. We're more or less covered everything we needed to talk about for today's session. This is a really quick one, unlike our regular writing sessions where we talk a little bit more about writing content. But this is more for onboarding, for running games for new players, how to help them get started building their characters for Adventures League. And what we're going to do next, really quickly, we're going to wrap up in maybe about 10 minutes, I think. But before that, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. I am going to be just taking questions for now for maybe another 10 minutes or thereabouts. If you think that you have some tips you want to share as well, you think that there's some things that we could cover, or you think that there's something else that we might need to talk about in our future DM inspiration sessions, feel free to let us know as well. We would love to hear from everyone. Especially if you are also a DM, if you think that there are some pointers that we could share, or if you think that you have something that could work, that might have worked for your table that you want to talk about as well, let us know. Personally, I'd say that most of the time when we are running Adventures League games, we've discovered that a lot of players are immediately excited about building their own character after their first tester session is over. And the best way to get everyone started learning more about their characters and learning how to build those characters is to do a live demo. So you get one of the players to sit down with you and you run them through that and you show them what is possible. And the other players, they get super excited and everyone just gets, thinking and starting to plan out their characters really quickly. Another fun way you can do this, and this is something that I've discovered is really cool for new groups as well, even whether it's homebrew game or adventurously game, is to simply get them started by having them pull options out of a hat. Or if you have a random number generator, you can do that as well. And this can be pretty interesting, especially if you have different options for them. So you could have a set of options, like for character classes, a set of options for character races, a set of options for their backgrounds and backstories. And once you have that set up, it's a quick, easy way to get the players involved and get them moving just with the story as well. Get them building their characters. So give that a try. It might prove to be interesting. And that element of randomness is great fun, especially if it's a group of friends or a group of people who know each other and they're not too fast about, making fun of each other at the table because they know each other and that's part of the rapport that they've already built. So we've done that a fair bit for some of our sessions that we have run for private games with those randomly generated characters and backgrounds. And it's worked wonders. It's also excellent for if you're running some other activities that are a little bit more, I guess, for public as well. If you want something quick and on the fly, you can do that too. So give that a try. It might actually prove to be interesting for the players as well. It's great for interaction, that's for sure. Right, so that's that for today's session. Would it be more useful to find out what kind of class they want to play? Let me see, let me take a look at that. And they could base their initial concepts around the class. I would say yes, that's possible. That's one option that you can consider. You can look into that. And if you think that a player is interested in a certain class, like maybe they really love, because they've read the rule book, they really love to be a paladin, you can help them along, help them to build their character concept to be a paladin. But most of the time, more often than not, and this is something that I like to say a lot when I'm running games, you are not your class. Your character lives in a fantasy world. You are in a world where you don't, I guess, unless it's kind of like those RPG style anime where you determine someone's class or there's some and you actually call them by their class. Like you call someone a black mage or you call someone a white mage and they don't have a name of their own, right? That's kind of weird. But otherwise, in a fantasy world, typically you don't identify as your class. You don't identify as your class. Instead, you have a job or a profession in this fantasy world. Like a cleric could be a priest. A cleric could also be a healer. A cleric could just be anyone who is somewhat religious and wields divine power, right? And you could be in any number of jobs. You could be a skilled surgeon, for all you know. You could be someone who's working with the military. You could be someone who's not affiliated to any church or any cause, and you would still be a cleric. Or you could be a wizard. You could be a holy wizard, for all you know. You could be, and generally people will say this is a wise man or sage or someone who's learned in the arcane ways or the divine ways. Right? You're just generally considered to be someone who wields magic. And for the vast majority of people who live in the fantasy world, they wouldn't know the difference between a wizard or a cleric, except maybe one of them casts magic from a spellbook or something, and another one prays to the gods for their powers. So those kinds of variations, or rather those kinds of differences, will be more readily obvious to the more learned or people who are maybe a little bit more experienced in the fantasy world. Like, but the average peasant wouldn't know the difference between a certain type of magic and another type of magic. The Weary Warlord says, I want to be an Italian plumber that takes mushrooms and have weird dreams about turtle dragons. That's actually not too difficult to do if you're interested. Depending on where your character lives in the fantasy world, like for example, if you were living in Faerun in Forgotten Realms, you could be, oh yeah, you could be a Beastmaster Ranger. That's entirely possible. And you could have a dinosaur for your pet. Yeah. Yep, Yoshi could be a dinosaur pet. That's entirely possible. If you wanted to be Mario or Luigi, there's nothing wrong with that. Being a plumber could be your job, your day job in the fantasy world. If you were living in the fantasy world, and I mean, they definitely need people to do the plumbing and the sanitation, right? Depending on how advanced the society is. You might be the one shoveling out the outhouse if it were in a very traditional fantasy world where there's not too much piping and plumbing. Or you could be doing pest control. Or you could be the one who's designing the aqueducts in the big cities. And you could or you could be just the person who's sweeping out the sewers. That's entirely possible, and there are all sorts of monsters in the sewers. You could be on sewer patrol most of the time. And if you wanted to maybe replicate the mushrooms making you grow bigger, you could think about how you could cast your spells. Enlarge is a spell that you could use. Enlarge is a viable spell, so you can think about the character classes or the characters' archetypes or subclasses that allow you to grow bigger. A Rune Knight allows you to grow bigger as well, so that could be possible. You could reflavor it. So that's entirely fair, and that could work. And you could definitely decide how that concept can play out in the fantasy world. And it actually works in Adventures League as well, because all you need to do is to put your ability scores in the right places and pick the right subclasses, and you can build your Super Mario wannabe. And that kind of works. If anyone else has some questions about the kind of potential options that you can use, I'm definitely happy to talk a little bit about this, because this is part of the fun, right? Helping people to build their characters is part of the fun. And for me, I really love helping people build characters. So this is actually a good option. This is a good opportunity if you want to ask about character concepts. So if you have anything that you want to talk about regarding character concepts, I'm happy to oblige. But before that, let me just go nip off and get a bit of a drink, because I haven't hydrated in a bit. And here I am coming back with my mug of water stuff. Tea. Anyway, yeah, so if anyone's interested, let's talk about it. I mean, unfortunately, if being the forever DM is challenging. I DM much more than I play these days, so I totally get you. I totally understand. It is. But yes, I do prefer DMing.
Stop whining.
It's a lot more fun for me to DM because
You have control issues.
no, I do not.
Yes, you.
Lies. Your first one only character you ever made and got to play was a cleric tiefling, so a tiefling cleric. What was your concept for that? What's your story for that? What domain was your cleric? Now that's an interesting part as well. That's an interesting choice for clerics if you ever build one. Picking the domain of your cleric is fascinating. It's one of those things that makes all the difference. But yes, clerics are kind of fun. I personally enjoy playing clerics, not as traditional clerics. I found that whenever people see clerics, they just tend to call a cleric character a healer, and they just tend to just kind of demand heals from clerics most of the time, and that's not so great. So, I mean, depending on what you want to do with your character concept, right? It can be interesting to see. You could build someone who's a necromancer to begin with. You could totally be a necromancer and use cleric as your class because you are so in tune with death. You're so familiar with death, and you might want to pick grave domain as your cleric subclass, and that's perfectly okay. Yeah, the idea of someone who's evil, yeah, being adopted to fight evil, yeah, that's lovely. It's a great concept. It definitely kind of works. It's got this slightly edgy, slightly dark vibe to it, and I'm sure that's gonna be a hit with a lot of players. It's kind of like Hellboy to some extent, yeah. Not too different from Hellboy. Hellboy is definitely a tiefling, right? So that could work. That could be kind of fun. I'm also generally pretty fond of reminding players that, hey, if you have a character that you really love in fantasy or pop culture or anything else that you might want to draw inspiration from, you can totally make your character kind of like that. You can draw inspiration from that. It's perfectly okay to use a reference from pop culture or from an anime or from another video game that you might be familiar with. And if you want to make an XP in D&D, yeah, go ahead. No one's judging. It's perfectly fine. And as a DM, we're here to help you to make that character happen. Especially if you are learning how to play the game and this is your first character. Totally make it happen. If it makes you understanding and learning the game easier, by all means go ahead. I'm perfectly happy with that. And so we've had lots and lots of people wanting to be Emiya Shiro from Fate Stay Night. We've had lots and lots of people wanting to be, what's the name of the character? Demon Slayers. And oh yeah, Kirito for sure. Kirito, the from Sword Art Online. We have had was it Tanjiro? Tanjiro from Demon Slayers.
Not as common.
Not as common, but somewhat common.
Mostly
Lots of Kiritos for sure.
Kirito. Much Kirito.
Yeah, but I mean, Demon Slayers only became popular over the pandemic, so that's kind of recent. And we've also seen lots of people wanting to be
And
yeah, Eren Yeager from Attack on Titan. Yeah, and we have also seen people try to replicate their Final Fantasy XIV characters, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. The beauty of D&D is that you can create anything if you put your mind to it. And so it's perfectly fine if you want to do that in Adventures League, so we can work it out. So you have a debate. Would you consider Jedi, Paladin, or Cleric? I would say it depends on the type of specialization you have. Whether if you were maybe if you were a more active Jedi that was going around, trying to fix problems around the universe, you might be a Paladin. You could also be a Blade Singer if you were a bit more meditative and you had mastered the Force more than you have mastered your use of lightsabers. You might be a Blade Singer. You could be a Cleric as well. Maybe you're a Jedi Counselor and you were mostly based in the, I don't know, if you're based at headquarters and you're doing things like training and administration. You could be a Cleric. Could you become the girl from Bofuri? Are you afraid of getting hurt? Is that why you want to wield the shield? You could totally stack defense. Do you also want to be the Bofuri girl who, I guess, evolves into that horrible attacking thing with the mecha armor? Was it mecha armor? I think she had some variation. Hey there, how you doing, Crimson Rockstar? Good to have you with us. We're pretty chill, I would say, and we're just chatting about D&D stuff. So on our end, we were just talking a little bit about how to run games for new players for D&D, and also a little bit about onboarding players for Adventurers League. And right now, we're talking about how, as a DM, you can help with character creation for new players by guiding them along and what kind of concepts we could work with. So we're just having a bit of a concept discussion right now. It's good to have you with us. How do you find out about us? Did you just hop in randomly for D&D content? So in D&D, I would say if you were thinking of building and stacking defense, you probably want to have a decent armor class. So that's your basic. And if you were to maybe replicate the girl from Bofuri, I can't remember her name for some reason or the other. She's wearing armor, isn't it? And she's carrying a really big tower shield. So that's something to think about. So you maybe want to wear some heavy armor, grab a shield. That will give you a starting AC of maybe 18 or thereabouts at level 1, which will make you pretty hard to hit. And Maple, there you go. Well done. It's not like I actually watched the series or anything. Actually, I didn't. In any case, yeah, like Jazit said as well, good positioning is really useful too. If you have good positioning, you get around a lot of problems. You just don't get hit if you don't stand in bad stuff, you don't stand in the way of bad stuff, you don't stand in fire, you don't take damage, right? You want a Shield Master feat for sure, I would say. And if you want to do that, if you want to get Shield Master, which is a fairly useful feat as well, you probably want to get that with a variant human at level 1. So, or you could go with a custom lineage. That would be kind of handy. Oh, hey, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. It's good to know that you're running tutorials at your game store for new players. That's awesome. This game is such a great game, and I definitely think that it's always good to have more people sharing their love for the game and information about the game with other people. So that's super good. Yeah, we just did some intro sessions over the weekend. We had quite a few tables over the weekend with lots and lots of new players, and it was so nice to see them just moving off after trying out the game, and they're all excited to come back. So you came back to Twitch after your old group asked if you would do a single session after a full year's break. Ah, nice. It's good to see that you're kind of starting up again. That's really, really lovely. I mean, in the past couple of years, things have just been kind of on the low for, I guess, most D&D players around the world as well, because, I mean, nobody's really able to go out or meet friends and all that because of the COVID, right? And it's so nice to see that things are just kind of picking up again. It's like D&D is kind of getting back on track, and we have definitely had more people come to our studio as well to just try out D&D to have fun. So back to Eladril's question about Maple, I would say definitely go for a variant human. Oh, what was that? No! Okay, sneak attack happened. Okay, anyway. Sneak attack aside, yeah. So think about maybe if you want a shield master feat really early, go variant human, grab your heavy armor, be a paladin perhaps. Paladins are great if you want to be tanky and you want to be want to be really survivable. and you want to be super good with your defenses all around. When you're the only DM they know and they begin to miss playing and they want to bother learning to DM. Yeah, that kind of happens. I know that a lot of people really want to play, but not so many want to DM, and it seems like an endemic problem in D&D, which is why we're running so many more DM inspiration streams these days, because we want to get more people interested in DMing and start easing them into DMing, make it not so difficult for them to DM, make it a bit more accessible for them to learn how to DM. Yeah, and it's fortunate for us because our playgroup, so Jazian and myself, here in the NTP studio, we're both DMs, and all the people we play with as well, they all tend to be DMs as well. So our regular playgroup has like maybe 6 DMs altogether, and we have occasional guests that kind of swap in and out, and they don't necessarily DM, but they're kind of familiar with the game, so that's really helpful for us. But yeah, definitely. In fact, one of the findings we had, we just recently did an Adventures League survey, a global survey for Adventures League. And in fact, that survey is going to be wrapping up tomorrow. So that tomorrow is going to be the final day for us to gather data for the survey. But so far, we've discovered there's a vast majority of players and players who are also DMs in general, and well, DMs who purely DM, forever DMs are a rare breed. So yep, there we go. That's a survey link. If you're interested in, sharing that link with your friends who play D&D, especially D&D Adventures League, or if you wish to help us out with the survey, this is primarily an Adventures League survey. It's there to help us gather information about trends in Adventures League around the world. We made an entire world during the game, so you have a natural choice for DM, but it'll be nice to be a player for once. Oh, for sure, I absolutely agree. And DMs who put in the effort, the time and trouble to build worlds. Now that's something that I would say is definitely a great thing. Hats off to you. So yeah. I love world building. That's something that we talk about here as well on our DM inspiration streams. So every now and then, I'll be sharing some tips and tricks about how to create your own stories, your own worlds, and all. Because I am a published DM's Guild author, so I do a lot of writing for DM's Guild. I have some adventures I've been written primarily for Adventures League, but we're also creating other content. Yeah. So definitely think about that. Yeah, get your friends to maybe run a one-shots so you can actually take a break. That's absolutely true. That's a good way to relax yourself a little bit and give yourself a chance to just, sit down, roll some dice, be in the player seat for once. Or you could maybe join some online games as well. If you're interested in playing with other people around the world, you could always just, maybe try out Adventures League. That's actually a good way to start. In fact, a lot of DMs we've discovered who run homebrew games for themselves and their friends, they have a guilty pleasure where they play Adventures League either at local stores near to them or they play Adventures League online. And that was actually how I started with Adventures League myself. I was curious about options to play because I have been DMing for a super long time. I am pretty much a forever DM. Though the truth is I love DMing, but sometimes I also want to go, hang out and just play and roll some dice myself. So
Entirely your fault.
yes, Jazzen says entirely my fault. But yeah, so absolutely how I found Adventures League was because I decided, hey, I want to go play some games instead of DMing all the time. And that was how I got started. And now I'm, DMing all the time, but I'm also one of the admins for Adventures League here in Singapore. And we pretty much run the biggest Adventures League organization here. But, that's how it is. But yeah, definitely playing around the table is great. I mean, here in the studio, we just love playing around with all the props, all the terrain, all the miniatures that we have, and it's all done by Jazzian. Lots of 3D printed stuff, lots of fun things that we have. Some of our friends have chipped in to help us out with the painting and the printing as well, and it's super good. So we have great things for our play group, and people who come to the studio sometimes get to play with them. So it's part of the fun for them as well. We get to benefit from our extensive collection. But yeah, so
Not yet.
it could be more extensive, but it's definitely getting bigger. And on Wednesday, you're gonna be if you come join us on Wednesday, you're gonna be able to see Jazian painting a really cool prop, the hand and eye of Vecna. So she's gonna be doing that on stream on Wednesday at 8:30 Singapore time. So that's gonna be happening just a couple of days, and I mean, I really love what she's done with that so far. She's just, or she might, yeah. So if she just changes what she paints to annoy me, yes, that's entirely possible. Oh, you've been here before? Wow, that's awesome. Trying to build a city that has strong Singapore, Las Vegas vibes. Oh, cool. So I'm guessing that your story is gonna be is it a little bit more modernized? So is it a little bit more urban fantasy style? Stranger Things 4? I haven't had the chance to sit down to watch Stranger Things in a long while, unfortunately. I would love to. And I know that Vagna features prominently in season 4, and that's a big thing. Yeah, so it's kind of cool. It's just that I haven't had the opportunity to sit down to watch it. It's just too many things going on right now. I'm in the middle of working on a manuscript for another publication. So I'm working on another D&D adventure to publish on DM's Guild, and that's taking up a fair bit of my time. Not, not to mention that I have quite a few things going on here in the studio as part of our day job. So that's super busy. There's quite a spread of genres mashed into one world. I'll love to see some of your details about your world at some point in time. Are you planning to publish? It's gonna be kind of cool. Another place that you can look at if you are interested to use as a reference for something that's very much like Singapore or Las Vegas, you can look at the city of Macau. Macau is also very much similar in that kind of vibe, I would say. So you can look at that as well. That's something to explore. Yeah. I mean, the most awesome thing about it now is that D&D is great for us DMs to do world building. And I think that there's so many tools out there. I've seen a lot of people publishing on World Anvil and putting up their own stories and their own campaigns out there as well. And there are also DMs that I knew who were making their own content, and they are now actually published either on DM's Guild or Kickstarter. And that's great. That's fantastic. So if you are planning to put stuff out, let us know. We'll be happy to do a shout out. We have friends who are in the midst of publishing their own campaign worlds as well. So it's always exciting to see what people come up with. Wow. Right, I guess it's almost time for us to wrap up the stream for today. It's getting a little late, and we have a very long day tomorrow. So I think I'll be calling it in maybe a couple of minutes. So right now, like I said, we're doing the survey. If you have friends who might be able to help us out with the survey, if you ever played Adventures League or if you know someone who plays Adventures League, please help us to share the survey information with them. Let me see if I got that right. Nope. Don't. What was the command for that again? I got it saved somewhere. Yeah, but what? Yes, we did run. We did run a convention with a Merlion familiar as a reward. That was absolutely fun. That was, and it was a great. It was a great familiar. It was, it was based off Equipper, and it could die for your sins, which is part of the fun. It could totally die for your sins.
No problem.
Ah, there we go. Yes, it's kind of like Merlion Jesus, I would say. I guess. Let me just go grab the film, grab that from the, like where it is right next to me. Here it is. Look at that. Merlion familiar. So cool. This was done by one of the local artists who is also, a fan of D&D, plays D&D, and is also a DM occasionally. And it was super well received. A lot of people loved the Merlion familiar, and we're hoping to bring it back. Maybe sometime this year when we do another Lion City Conclave. So there you go. You heard it first. We're going to be doing Lion City Conclave. I'm not going to talk about the dates yet because because we'll be talking and releasing the dates as and when we can. So when that happens, everyone will be the first to. So you have made a necrotic console running on life energy, a dessert that makes you sweat out unwanted feelings, creating monsters in the sand. Urban neighborhoods run with mud spider cults that is veganous. Yeah. Wow. That is definitely interesting. Undead console running on life energy. I would definitely love to see that sometime. In any case, thank you all so much for tuning in tonight and being here with us on our stream. I hope that for our new friends who have just joined us today, if you are interested, please, feel free to follow us and join us on Discord as well. So that's where you can always catch up with us to chat, or we can trade tips and stuff. But we are going to be wrapping things up right now because, Jazin's hungry and I'm kind of feeling kind of hungry myself. So maybe it's time for supper.
Chicken rice.
Chicken rice? Yeah, you can definitely come hang out, you can share your stories with us as well. Yeah, on our Discord. Let's see if we can get that going. Yeah, so come check out our Discord channel. And also, if you are ever interested to look out for more of our content, we're available on DM's Guild. We've got some stuff published. Ah, stop it, no! Oh, that sneak attack. Wednesday, which is in a couple days time, yeah, well, Jazian, who is now attacking me with a plushie, and more plushies. No, go away. Stop it. That slime is dangerous, I tell you. So Jazian will be streaming on Wednesday, and hopefully we'll be seeing the Hand and Eye of Vecna on stream, and that will be kind of cool. She's really, really good at painting up all the cool stuff and props in our studio, and I can't wait to see what she does with the Hand and Eye of Vecna. All right, thank you all. Thanks everyone, and have a good night or a good day wherever you are. I'll see you next week, same time on Monday, 8:30 p.m. Singapore time, and we will be talking more DM inspiration. Painting stream when? Damn it is. I'm terrible at painting. And with that, cheers everyone. This is Crimson signing off.